Holy sh**. Alright guys, hope you're all doing well and keeping safe. Today I want to show you one of the best skill builds you can use for any difficulty because it just melts regardless, and that's whether you're a solo player or you play in a group. This works for both. Now this skill build does the highest amount of one-shot damage. You know, it applies a good amount of status effect damage, which actually makes this build do another 30% amplified damage on top of the already insane amount of damage that you're doing, and you'll find that you're rarely taking any damage yourself as well, which is nice. Now the footage in the background is of me using this build, and you can just see how easy this heroic control point is and how I literally take no damage throughout. With that said guys, let's get into the build. There's no doubt that you've seen a similar build to this before, but this is a build that I've not seen exactly this way before, and this is why I wanted to bring this out to you guys, and I'll talk about some other options that you can put in here if you wanted to try it out your own way. So, as you can tell from the footage and just from looking at this is a Mortar skill build. Now, Mortars in this game are really strong. If you build around them, they're really strong and they do an insane amount of damage. This build, when I've tested it in the shooting range, can do up to 6.8 million one-shot damage build. It may even do more than that. I can't remember if I had everything procced or not. And this isn't fully min-maxed either, guys, you know, so let's go over it. So in terms of the weapon, to start with, well, the first thing you got to start off with is the specialization. We've gone with a grenade launcher, and that's really because you get that explosive damage. I believe it's 15% extra explosive damage, which of course makes the mortar that much stronger, and you're always going to want to use this specialization for this type of build, unless of course you wanted to go with something like technician, where you could get that extra one skill tier, and you maybe wanted to take some away from this and put a red on. Maybe you just wanted that extra bit of weapon damage, but here you're going to want to use the grenade launcher for that explosive damage. In terms of the weapon here, we're using Harmony because it's got perfectly in sync. This is the named weapon here. So hitting an enemy grants 20% skill damage for 5 seconds. Of course, when you are kind of using your weapon and you are using, on this particular build, the drone, if you hit a target with the weapon and with the drone, then you get an extra 40% weapon damage and you get an extra 40% skill damage, which just makes this so much stronger as well. That's why I'm using Harmony. You could use another weapon that has got in sync. You could use the classic M1A, which is 15%, but you do lose 10% weapon damage. You do lose 10% skill damage by using this, which is why I've decided to use the Harmony instead for this build, because you'll find that you're not shooting a whole lot, and certainly you're not doing a whole lot of weapon damage overall. Secondary weapon is Mechanical Animal, and this is so that you can use Overdrive. Now, if you do... Is it Overdrive? Overcharge, sorry. When you do use Overcharge, then damage-wise, this goes up to about, I think, about 8 million, if not more. When I said earlier about the 6.8 million, then that's not with Overcharge. But if you do use this, and I'd recommend trying to use this as much as possible, then you do get an insane amount of damage. You'll be one-shotting elites in this, in heroic content. And legendaries, you're going to be doing so much damage that, as an overall kind of AoE damage, that a lot of the enemies will be down to pretty much no armor. They'll have no armor left. So that's why this is such a strong build, because especially in a group as well, you're gonna, if you have more than one person using this, if there's a cluster of enemies, then they're all just dead pretty quickly. So just going over the build itself, we're using one piece China Light here, and that's because you get that 15% explosive damage, you get 10% skill damage, 12% skill haste. You can see on here, and I've rolled 10.1% skill haste here. And it's always nice to get skill haste as much as possible. My cooldown is 9.4 seconds. It's always nice to just get those cooldowns as quickly as possible, because you will find that with this build in particular, I've got 10 ammo on it, and so you'll find that you do eventually run out, but you know, the more that you can use in one go, the better, and that's why you really want to roll skill haste here. Skill duration isn't such a big deal. Skill haste is probably the most important, so you're going to be wanting to get that there. So that's why I've got skill damage and skill haste on this particular piece of gear. Now we'll move on to the other pieces here first before we go over to the China, over to the Providence and stuff. So for the holster, I've gone for Wyvern Wear because you get 10% skill damage. I've got skill haste, and then as you can see, I've got skill damage on there. That's pretty much what you want. Of course, you want max skill damage, but I don't unfortunately have that piece yet. But you know, if you can get max skill damage, then perfect. That's the piece that you want. In terms of the knee pads, we've gone with Hana U. So the one piece gives you skill haste. I'm using 2 pieces here, which gives me 10% skill damage as well. So again, with the knee pads, pretty self-explanatory. Skill damage, skill haste, max rolls. And on the gloves, again, we're using skill haste, skill damage, Hana U, and you want to get max rolls on those as well, guys. So yeah, pretty self-explanatory. Now, this is where the variation changes, guys. Now, you're going to see builds on everywhere that varies these two predominantly, and that's the chest piece and the backpack. So I'll give you 2 options here that I like to use. So if you're comfortable with with having perfect glass cannon on, which I am, then this is going to be the best piece for out-and-out damage, because you get 30% amplified damage. So obviously this piece isn't the perfect roll. I don't have perfect skill damage and nor skill haste. So ideally what you want here is you want skill damage, skill haste, and skill haste. I've only got skill damage. You could even have skill damage, status effects, and skill haste, but you probably want to get as much skill haste as possible, really, because the tick damage on status effects for this build isn't that considerable. It's nice, but you're never going to make it that considerable, I don't believe. And actually, it's the status effect duration, which is probably the most important, which you'll see in a minute. So, yeah, perfect glass cannon, or you could run something like kinetic momentum, although I don't really like kinetic momentum myself personally. I like to use Overwatch as well. That gives you 12% weapon damage and 12% skill damage as long as you remain in cover, which you are going to do with this build as much as possible. So I like this piece as well. But the reason I've gone for perfect glass cannon is because you'll find that with this build, the majority of the time, NPCs are not firing on you. If you're playing through control points, using something like this is probably best. If you're doing missions, then maybe something like Overwatch might be better when you're being rushed. So, yeah, that's the chest piece. Now, onto the backpack. Now, what you're going to find funny about this is I'm using one-piece gear set here, and I don't see any builds using this, and I don't really know why. So, I've got skill damage, I've got skill haste, but the talent Symptom Aggravator does work as just one piece. Amplifies all damage you deal to status-affected targets by 30%. Now, when you're using this build, if you're not one-shotting elites, which you won't be doing unless you have overcharge on, and that's not on most, for a lot of the time, you are going to apply a status effect, a bleed status effect. So having this gives you that extra 30% damage to those status effect enemies. If you're playing heroic, and certainly if you're playing legendary, what you'll find is that if you're hitting elites, then you are going to need this extra 30% in order to two-shot them. Heroic not so much, but legendary for sure. And so having this extra 30% just really makes a huge difference, guys. It really does. And I don't see anyone using this, to be honest, guys. Now, I've seen a lot of people going for something like this China Light piece. You get extra 10% skill haste, but perfect shock and awe. Applying a status effect gives you 20% skill damage and repair for 27 seconds. But obviously, this has a timer on it. It's 27 seconds. It's only 20%. And personally, I don't think you need the repair, which is why I've decided to go with this Eclipse Protocol piece, giving me 30%. Yeah, I don't get the repair, but I don't think it's needed. And you can see that here because I'm not, I'm using perfect glass cannon. And the reason why is because of the drone. Now, this drone on tier 6, it doesn't get shot down easy. It goes around the map. You can obviously direct it to wherever you want. If you're being rushed, you can direct it on the NPC that's rushing you. And for the most part, NPCs are just going to focus on the drone. So for the most part, they're not actually going to be aiming at you. Certainly when you're doing kind of open world stuff, control point stuff like that, they're not going to be aiming on you. If you're doing missions, then yeah, like I said, maybe you'd want to put on Overwatch here, and maybe you'd want to put on strategic alignment, maybe. But if you're doing open world stuff and you're just wanting to do as most of that amount of damage possible, and you can move out of the way of enemies, and you know how to use the build, you know how not to be flanked, then there's no reason why you shouldn't be running this Eclipse Protocol backpack to give you that extra damage. There's no reason why you shouldn't be running perfect glass cannon. This is going to give you the most amount of damage, guys. This is going to by far give you the most amount of damage. The drone is really strong. It shreds, especially if you're using perfectly in sync as well. You're going to get extra 40% damage on this drone, and this drone is going to shred through enemies. What you'll end up finding is that the mortar actually does a lot of damage. It gets everything down to basically killable very quickly, especially elites. It one-shots veterans, no problem. It one-shots red bars. In terms of elites, it gets them down very low on heroic, and then your drone just clears up, or you just shoot them and you clear up, or they're so low that you can just use the mechanical animal. You get that overcharge, and then you start one-shotting everything. In legendary, you're going to be getting everything down very, very, very low, and again, you can just use your mechanical animal to get that overcharge to do loads of damage. You get that 30% off Eclipse Protocol here. You do an extra 40% damage from Harmony. You just get through content very, very quickly, and that's whether you're in a solo. And if you run this in a group, then you're just going to be doing so much damage that actually a lot of your group will find that they don't need to do a whole lot themselves. If you have 2 people running this build, it's brilliant. The only downside to this build, guys, and I like to mention downsides because they are obvious, is that this build really requires you to be at a height advantage most of the time. Not always, but you'll find that if you're down on the ground with NPCs, that actually you need that bit of height to really give you that advantage. And that's where this shines the most. It's not to say that this doesn't work when you're not at height, but you'll find that this build shines the most when you are at height. And there may even be other skill damage builds that work better, like the build that I run a lot, which is the hybrid DPS and hybrid skill build with a drone and a turret. You might find that that works better at ground level than something like this, but this does work still very well. You still do the same amount of damage. You just find that there's a lot of clutter that gets in the way. It's hard to actually target enemies. They roll out of the way more often than when you're at height and you have that significant advantage. But that's it for today's video, guys. Thanks very much for watching. Hopefully you all have a great weekend, and I will see you next week. Epic out.